Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And Ginny, I'm going solo on this podcast going forward. I'm out. I'm going to start out on my own.
Peace.
Right after this. Except I'm not going to do that because
I know you're not.
This is kind of fun. So
yeah, it's kind of boring by yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have any problem listening to myself speak. I think most listeners have probably figured that out already. In fact, a lot of times on the show, I have to consciously remind myself, shut up, stop talking. Because I'll look at the transcripts and it will show percentage of time, speaker 1, speaker 2.
Oh, it does?
Yes. And I'm like, oh, oops.
It's funny.
So, yeah. So it's kind of like a solo cast some days, when I just can't shut up and don't let you get a word in edgewise. But I'm not going to do that today. We're going to have some good balance to the conversation because we are talking about going out on your own, but not me taking this podcast solo, but rather listeners who may be working in-house or at an agency thinking maybe it's time to hang a shingle.
Time. Yep.
And so what are some of the things that you have to be thinking about? What are some of the things that folks are struggling with as they look at that? And we've had a number of questions that have popped up in the SpinSucks community and elsewhere of late where people are considering this or thinking about different angles. And so I think we can talk about some of the common challenges when you're just getting started.
Yeah. I always say that making the decision to go out on your own is the hardest part. Because once that's done, you've sort of kind of figured it all out. I mean, just what needs to be right. What needs to be done from the perspective of, okay, I can replace my salary. I can figure out my benefits. I am going to make sure that we still have a roof over our head. Like all of that stuff is the stuff that drives anxiety, right? That produces the nerves and all those kinds of things. So once you figure out and you say, okay, I know I can do this, and here's how I'm going to replace those things so that I'm going from a steady paycheck to maybe not so steady paycheck. I'm going from benefits to no benefits. I'm going, all of these things that you have that you're perceiving you won't have when you go out on your own. So making the decision to do it is the hardest part. And then you have to figure out, am I going to specialize? Do I need to do sales? What percentage of my time should be sales? Do I need to offer all things to all clients? Do I work with any client just because I need the business? All of those things are decisions you have to be making.
Well, and a lot of those things circle around how do you generate revenue?
Yep.
Right? Because once you've decided to pull that trigger, and it is absolutely the biggest hurdle to get over, the second biggest hurdle is typically hiring your first employee.
Yes.
Because that then changes the whole dynamic of your business. But once you've gotten over that hurdle and you're out there and you're like, oh, I actually don't have a steady paycheck coming. I kind of need to keep generating revenue and profit so that I keep putting money in my pocket and food on the table.
Yeah. And it's really, it can be really scary. So when I went out on my own, I had a client that was going to pay me in an annual retainer a little bit more than I was making in a salary. There were two things that were important to me. One, that I continued to make the salary that I was making at the agency and that I could make my BMW payment. Those were the two things that were important to me.
Priorities.
I was in my early 30s. Like that was important. And so once I knew how I was going to replace that income, I was ready to make the jump. So it truly is the hardest part, is making the decision to do it, because you have to figure out all of those kinds of things. And then once you're in it, and certainly most of you that are listening to this podcast are either in it or about to go in it, you do have to think about all these other things. Am I going to have employees? Am I going to use contractors? If a prospect comes to me and they want media relations and content and social and some paid social, can I do all of those things? Or do I need to find partners to work with? What am I going to do about benefits? What am I going to do about paid time off? If I'm not working, I'm not billing my time, can I have that time off? So these are all the things you have to be thinking about. Who's going to be doing business development? Is that me? What percentage of my time should be spent on biz dev? Lots and lots and lots of decisions to make.
A huge number of decisions. Of course, you can't tackle them all at once, and you will struggle if you try. And I do know that some folks want to sit down, and particularly there are a lot of planners who listen to us, and they want to plan everything out and plot the steps and all that. And You can start doing that, but your plan's going to get tossed out the window halfway through your first day. So
Right.
you need to be flexible and make adjustments as you go, because what you thought was the right path forward before you pulled the trigger may change a week, a month, a year in, as you gather additional information, as you frankly figure out what you enjoy doing and don't enjoy doing. What can you do well in that environment versus what could you do well when you were in a larger organization, right? All those things will change. So you need to be able to be flexible and move with it. But something that you said, I think, is one of the keys for a lot of folks, which is to start ideally with a client out of the gate.
Yeah.
Right. So don't hang your shingle until you've lined up at least your first piece of work. And it doesn't have to be necessarily as good as what you described, where it's the one retainer that covers your whole previous salary and your car payment. That's, we all have priorities, I guess.
That was my priority.
And I guess if you don't make rent, you could at least live in that car.
Correct.
Right?
It was nice enough that I could live in it. Yeah.
There you go. Okay. So to each their own. So you have to be thinking about those kinds of things. And so it will certainly increase your comfort level if you've been able to line up the business in advance. Now, obviously, that's dependent upon your own work situation, right? There are some jobs that you have where you can line up clients while you're still employed. Others where that would be frowned upon. And so you need to make sure that you're following the right rules and regulations there, so you don't start out with a problem right out of the gate. But it will really help you if you've got that a little bit of success on the business development journey first, before you really have to fight and claw and do everything to keep growing your revenue.
Yeah, and there's also something to be said between doing business development because you're desperate and business development because you want to grow. And just like in any other situation, if you're desperate, people can sense that, and it's a lot harder. But if you have enough lined up that you can make, that you're comfortable, that you can pay your bills and make your car payment, and allow you to be able to not be desperate, but to be able to go after the right kinds of clients, the right kinds of prospects, you're going to be much more successful. Because in desperation, you make all sorts of bad choices, bad decisions. And when you're really thoughtful about it, because you have the ability to do that, you tend to be, it tends to go a little more smoothly for you.
Absolutely. Now let's touch on some of the specific questions that we've gotten from folks who are thinking about going out on their own or just getting ready to do it. And so one of the common ones is, should I be doing actual traditional outbound sales? Should I be following the peso model for my own agency? And folks who listen to us know that we are big believers in growing your reputation and attracting people to you. But you're right out of the gate. You don't have that reputation, at least as a solo or an agency. You have that reputation from things you've done in the past. So how do you transfer it, and do you need to engage in more traditional sales tactics to get started?
Yeah. So, there are a couple of things about outbound sales. First of all, you have to do business development. I don't like to call it sales. I like to call it business development. I think it's different. Maybe
it's
not.
It's 100% different, and I think that's why a lot of agency folks get hung up, because they think of it as sales. And as soon as you say sales, people think, used car salesman.
Used car salesman, right?
And that is not what
right.
agency business development is or should be.
Yeah, I actually had a new business call last week, and you and I have talked about this on this podcast, where it's more listening and asking the right questions than it is talking about yourself or, doing the dog and pony show. And so we had this new business meeting, and I asked, I have a list of questions that I ask. I also ask a lot of questions to determine if there are red flags, reasons we wouldn't want to work with the company. And I'm going through the questions, and I'm asking deeper, and I'm asking, they keep saying we need to be on TikTok. And so I kept asking why, so that I could get to the real issue of it. And about 2 hours after the call ended, the CEO emailed me and said, that was the best, most insightful conversation I've had in years. And I was like, I didn't say anything. I just asked questions.
Right.
So when you think about it from that perspective, you're not selling. You're not saying, we're great, we're awesome, hire us. You're asking really insightful questions to help you understand whether or not this is going to be the right client for you. And in return, because of the questions that you're asking and the way that you're approaching it, the prospect thinks you're brilliant. And you haven't even done or said anything, which is amazing. And you're not selling. So change your mindset from that perspective.
Well, and part of the reason that works is because so many others in the agency space rush in and just want to, blab on about all the great things that they can do and how smart they are and how much success they've had, and they want to pitch you on a specific idea. And so it's a very different experience for most prospects when you do come in with those intelligent questions. And frankly, sometimes they don't even have to be all that intelligent, right? They can be
Right.
actually fairly obvious questions.
Right.
But you can bet that the prospect hasn't been asked those questions probably by any other agency or internally either.
Right.
And so the fact that they get to start speaking and talking out loud about some of the things that they haven't talked about before automatically makes you look smarter. And that's really helpful. But at the same time, you're learning, you're picking up valuable information. And none of this is traditional sales, right? This
Right.
is not,
Right.
this is not
Right.
you go in and you're talking about all the features and benefits of it, and you're trying to accelerate the close. In fact, I get that question from clients. How can I get this to close by the end of the quarter? I really need to hit my numbers in, October or whatever. And I say, you don't, right?
Right.
You just be responsive to them and it will progress naturally. Don't be a holdup, right? Don't take forever to respond to their questions or get them information that they need. But don't try to artificially accelerate the process. Don't engage in traditional sales tactics because A, you're probably not comfortable with them, so you're not going to do them great.
Right.
And B, it's not how you get good clients. It might get you a client and some revenue in the short term, but it's going to burn bridges because you're not going to get the right clients and the right business. So think about it in terms of business development. Think about it in terms of growing your network. And if you think about it that way, it's a lot less scary for most of you.
Yes. And I will add as well that one of the things that I think most of us agency owners think about is how to hire somebody to help us with business development. Because it gets to the point where, and certainly in my business, it got to the point a few years ago that it was too much for me to handle. It is one of the most challenging things that you can do is to hire somebody else to do it, because they don't know the business as well as you do. They don't know the team as well as you do. They don't know the clients or the results that you've gotten in other case studies as well as you do. And no matter how much training you do, they're not going to be as effective as you are. And that might be okay. But you have to be willing to first do it yourself so that you understand the process, you understand the kinds of things that you need to ask, you know what your red flags are, you've created a process that's easy to replicate, and then coach and train and coach and train and coach and train. And still, nobody else is going to be as good at it as you are. So you have to be willing to take that, what's the word I want, loss a little bit in order to scale. So you might go down a little bit in order to scale, but you will get there. It's just not going to be as effective as if you do it yourself.
Yeah, and I would argue that you almost no agency that I can think of should be outsourcing business development to another employee or contractor or whatever in its entirety.
You
used the right language before and you said help with. But that's not help with the actual final portion of the process. It's help along the way. It's help in maintaining lists for marketing, helping to set up appointments, helping to do the infrastructure type things that go along with it. It is not the actual conversations that lead to business development. Those are things that you need to own in a small agency, or particularly in what we're talking about today, when you're first getting started. In fact, when you're first getting started, you probably can't even find someone to help you because you don't have that revenue coming in to pay them. Right. So unless you got a beautiful severance check from your last employer, you're going to be in a position where you've got to sort this out yourself. And the way you do it is by engaging in a lot of the things that we talked about, but it's not sales. It can be growing your network, right? Which looks a lot like sales.
Yep.
It's not. It's having meaningful conversations with people who may or may not be able to buy your services or may not be a right fit, but you're gathering information, you're getting your name out there, you're finding new people to talk to. And so from a getting started standpoint, you absolutely have to do that kind of outbound work because nobody knows what you're doing yet. And you can't just build a website and throw it up and expect that business is going to start pouring in tomorrow. It's not.
Right. No, it's not. Unfortunately, it's not. I will tell you, we have online courses and masterminds and coaching and all that kind of stuff. And before the pandemic, I had a whole sales team focused on that. And still, they would have the initial conversations and they would do a great job. They could not close. They couldn't. So when we got somebody to the point where, it wasn't a small investment, but we got somebody to the point where they were investing in one of our programs, I was the one who had to close. I was the one who had to have the conversation. And then it got to the point where I was kind of frustrated because I was still doing the actual work, but it was taking more time because we had all these other people in the process. Right. So you have to figure those pieces of it out too, because you get to the point where you're like, is this really worth it? Or are they really helping me? And we got to the point where we're like, they're not actually helping, they're actually hindering. So we stopped.
Well, the other problem is when you're delegating business development, that person's role is focused on business development. And so what do? They bring in business. Is it good business?
Right. Right.
Are the expectations set correctly? Maybe not. Because their goal, and typically what they're compensated based on, is how much they're actually bringing in from a revenue standpoint.
That's right.
So I never, in any agency, want people to be closing business who are not having at least some role in delivering on the promises made. Because that usually helps to constrain it into a reasonable place. Because the reason why most agency-client relationships fail is because of mismatched expectations.
Yep.
You have a client who's expecting one thing, an agency who's expecting another, and when those don't meet, you have a problem. And more often than not, the agency keeps their mouths shut during the business development process because they just want to win.
That's right.
That's a bad idea. You can't change the client after the fact. Change them during the business development stage to see your way, and if they don't, move on. Go somewhere else.
That's right. One of the other questions we've gotten is whether or not to specialize, especially going out on your own. We've heard, well, I'm great at content marketing or I'm great at media relations, but I also believe in the peso model. Should I be trying to do all of the things for all of the clients, or should I specialize?
You need some kind of focus. And I think we've talked about, I hate the word specialize. It freaks people out, but you need to have some kind of focus. And that focus on day one may not be the same focus you have even on day 30.
Right.
Because you're going to learn as you're having these conversations and growing your network, you're going to learn what the market really needs at that point. And you're going to start to see what people actually want to discuss in terms of projects with you. And that may cause you to make some adjustments. Then once you start delivering services, you'll make further adjustments because you'll realize, oh, I actually don't like doing the social media management stuff. It's kind of boring. It's the same thing day in and day out. It doesn't do the interesting stuff. I'm not picking on social media management today, but it's an example, folks. Okay. And there are people who love it too. So you need to figure out what works for you. And then as you grow a team, your team needs to be factored into that as well, because you want to be doing more of what you do well, more of what you do profitably. And that means having some kind of focus. If you just walk around saying, I'm good at media relations, I can do it for anybody. First, I would say to you, I call BS.
It's total BS. You cannot.
You can't.
Right.
The same person who can do PR for the White House can't necessarily do it for Kim Kardashian and a local restaurant. Are there commonalities that come into play? Absolutely. But they are all different things, and the skill sets that you need and the knowledge that you need and the connections that you need will be different for all of those.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that, because when I started my business, I thought I could do media relations for all clients, and quickly found out that no, that's not the case at all. I also happened to be in a meeting probably about a month ago with a lobbying firm, and they were talking about media relations around an event and doing some stuff with Congress. And I was like, I mean, I'm good at my job. I was way out of my depth. Like, it's a totally different ball game. Not at all what I am accustomed to doing. It's a different game. So I think you're right that that is BS. You can't do those kinds of things. I would say if you're going to go out on your own, pick an industry to focus on and pick a media type that you're going to focus on. You can always bring in contractors or, friends to help you out for the other stuff. If somebody says, oh, you're great at content marketing, we need to add email, or we need to add social, or we do need to add media relations, you can bring in contractors to help you do those things. But focus on an industry, focus on one media type, and then start to grow from there.
And look at your own history. Look at the work that you've actually done and enjoyed and been successful at in whatever organizations you've been in previously. So start by thinking about that. And I'm talking about the work that you've actually done, not the work that you've overseen, right? So if you're coming from a fairly senior role and you had a bunch of different people underneath you, if you oversaw someone who did video production, but you've never done video
Right.
production, don't
Totally
hold yourself
different.
out to be doing video production now.
Right.
Okay, you may have enough knowledge to be able to oversee it and to ask some questions. It's not the same as actually doing it. And so what you may need to do if you're in that kind of a senior role today is think back 5 or 10 years and think about the kinds of things that you executed on well, because when you're first getting started, you will be doing a disproportionate share of the execution in all likelihood.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are situations where that may not be the case, but I would say 99% of the time when I see someone go out on their own, they're doing predominantly client service right out of the gate. And that's fine, but make sure it's the stuff that you do and do well, because otherwise you'll have a mismatch. You can always evolve over time. And as you bring in revenue and grow your team, you can offer additional services, maybe ones that you were great at overseeing, but you have to hire someone to do the actual day-to-day work. Just be smart about it. Don't try to be all those things to all the people right out of the gate when you first get started.
That's a really great point, because I think a lot of people go out on their own having overseen a team for many years, and then they have to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty again. And it's a big culture shock. So that's another thing I think you need to take into consideration is you're actually going to be pitching the media, or you may be doing the actual graphic design, or you may actually be developing the websites, or you might actually be writing the blog posts and the white papers, or you might actually be the one posting on Twitter every day. Those are the kinds of things that you're going to be doing when you're starting out.
Right. Or you're going to need to charge so much that you can afford to outsource it.
Right.
And that's a unique individual who can do it. There are ones who can do it, but you need to plan that into that focus that you have. Because if you're going to have to be charging those premium rates so that you can remain as just an overseer, strategist, manager, which is, I think, the dream of a lot of people when they're starting their own agency business. If you're going to do that, then you need to be focused on clients who can pay that premium.
Right.
And will see the value in what you're providing. So you have to have that realistic take on it, because that's where a lot of these situations go bad, because someone decides to hang the shingle. They were really effective as a VP or a CCO or something like that. And so naturally I should be able to do this. Well, maybe.
Right.
But it's different. And so, just because you enjoy eating at a nice restaurant doesn't mean that you can become a chef. Or maybe you were a line cook back in college, and then you went on with and so you say, oh, well, I did that in the past. I can do that now and open my own restaurant and I'll run the kitchen. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. You need to be realistic about what you can do, what you're willing to do, and how that impacts the focus of the business that you're starting.
I will say this, though, in closing. Going out on your own is one of the most fruitful things that you can do for yourself and your career. You're in charge of your own destiny. You're in charge of how much you make or how little you make. You're in charge of, you're the decision maker, and the buck definitely stops with you. Now, you may make decisions where you're not making a paycheck, or you're not getting the right benefits, or you didn't hire the right team. And those are things that we all have to experience. But being in charge of your own destiny is there's something to be said for that. And so don't let this conversation scare you away from doing it, but just understand that you should be prepared and plan for it.
Absolutely. And it's a great learning experience as well. And I'm a big believer in lifelong learning and continuing to pick up things as you go forward in your career. And those things will help you not only in running your own business, it will help you in the advice that you're providing to clients.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because when you run your own business, you have a much better perspective on how your clients are looking at things, because you need to ask yourself, how would I think about this if this was someone doing this work for my business?
Yep.
All of a sudden, whole different perspective, and it really helps you give better advice, sell better services, and have better results at the end of the day.
Absolutely. 100%.
So hopefully we've produced some results for you in this conversation, given you a few things to think about. And I guess after this, Ginny, I'm not going to go solo.
Thanks.
I'm going to stick with you, and we'll continue. As long as you'll have me, we'll continue to have a two-person podcast.
Fantastic.
So, with that, I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends.